Hello everyone, today we are talking about how to solve two-step equations. So remember, if we are solving an equation, we want to get an answer where x is by itself. So x equals 2, x equals 5, something like that. So what we are doing when we are solving an equation is we are isolating the variable. And how we are going to get rid of some things to get that x by itself is we're going to use something called inverse operations that are going to undo each other. All right, when we think about our operations, we're thinking add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So if we have something like addition, the inverse operation will be subtraction. If we have multiplication, the inverse will be division. The last thing we're going to want to remember is to save the variable for last. So I'll talk about what that means as we go through some examples. Let's look at our first problem together. So we have 3n minus 4 equals 11. The very first thing we're going to do every single time is to draw two lines around that equal sign. We call it the railroad tracks or the river. Now, those two lines are very important because whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. Because right now we have these two sides that are equal, and if we do something to one side but we don't do it to the other, then those two things are no longer equal. The next thing I'm always going to have you guys do is to circle whatever number is going with our variable. So we can see in this case that 3 is going to go with that n. So that's the side that we're going to focus on. And again, I'm going to save that variable for last. So whatever's in that circle or that bubble, I'm going to leave until the second step. So that means that if I'm looking on this side, I'm leaving that 3 alone for now. I need to get rid of a minus 4. So the opposite of minus 4 would be to add 4. So I'm going to write plus 4. But I'm not going to do it just on one side, remember. I have to do it on both sides of those railroad tracks or river. So I'm going to write plus 4, and draw a big line across the bottom. Now, think about if I have negative 4 and I add 4, that's going to make 0. So I can cross these out, and I'm going to bring down whatever's in that bubble. So I'm going to bring down my 3n equals, now on this side, 11 plus 4 is going to give me 15. All right, so that was our first step of our two-step equation. Now again, we're going to have two steps. So when I see a number and a variable right next to each other, there's nothing in between. These are being multiplied. So if it helps you to write that little dot in there to remind yourself this is 3 times n, we need to do that inverse operation, which in this case will be dividing. So I'm going to divide by 3. Again, whatever I do on one side, I have to do on the other. So on both sides. Now if I take 3 divided by 3, that just gives me 1. So I can cross that out. And 1n is the same as just n by itself. We can write it alone. So I have n equals 15 divided by 3 gives me 5. All right, we always want to go back and check our solution. So remember that a solution is a number we can plug in for that variable, and it's going to make the equation true. So let's practice that together. So I have 3 times, instead of n, I'm going to put 5, minus 4, and hopefully I get 11. So 3 times 5 gives me 15. 15 minus 4 is indeed 11. So my answer checks out. All right, let's try another one together. All right, for number 2, our variable's on the different side, but it doesn't matter. We're going to follow the same steps. I'm going to draw that river or railroad tracks in first. And I'm going to circle whatever is with that variable. This time that x and 2 will go together, and that little 4 is hanging out outside. So again, I go to the side of the variable. I'm saving that variable for last, so I need to worry about this plus 4 first. The opposite of plus 4 is going to be a minus 4. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. Big line to show that I'm doing that step. Now, negative 8 minus 4 gives me a negative 12 equals, and remember plus 4 and minus 4 again are going to make 0. So I get to cross them out and bring down whatever's in that bubble, x over 2. Now remember, when we have a fraction written like this, this really means x divided by 2. So the opposite of dividing by 2 is to multiply by 2. So I'm going to write times 2 on both sides. Draw that big line for my second step. 2 times the negative 12 gives me negative 24 equals, that times 2 and dividing by 2 are going to cross out because again 2 divided by 2 is just 1, which gives me x. So x equals negative 24. Again, we're always going to do that check step, so I'm going to plug that negative 24 in for x. So I'm going to take negative 24 divided by 2 plus 4. So negative 24 divided by 2 is negative 12, plus 4 is going to give me a negative 8, which is what I wanted, so our answer checks out. All right, number 3, we're gonna do the same thing. So we're gonna draw that river or those railroad tracks first. And we are going to circle our -3 with our A this time. That is not. All right, so number 3, we are going to do the same thing. So we're going to draw those railroad tracks or river first. All right, this time we'll notice we have 2 variables. And if you remember from previous videos, that this -3a and +7a are like terms because they both have that same variable a. So this time the first step is going to be to combine like terms. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to leave that -4 alone, equal sign in the middle. Now a -3 plus a +7 will give me 4. And we're going to leave that label with it, right? So 4a. All right, now again, just like before, this 4 is really being multiplied by a. So how do I get rid of multiplying by 4? I'm going to divide by 4. I want to do it on both sides. Draw that big line. All right, so on the left-hand side, -4 divided by 4 gives me -1. 4 and divided by 4 is just +1, right? So I get to cross those out, and that leaves me alone with a. So our answer this time is -1 equals a. We're going to take a second and plug that back in. So we've got -3 times -1 plus 7 times -1. -3 times -1 is a +3. 7 times a -1 is going to be a -7. And 3 minus 7 is going to give me -4, which again is that answer that I wanted over there. So our work checks out. We've got one last example for today. So let's take a look. We have number 4. Draw those railroad tracks of that river. This time when we circle, our B is going to go with our 10 up top. So the first step this time is I want to get rid of this big fraction, -5, right? Remember that fraction is going to mean division. So the opposite of dividing by a -5 is going to be to multiply by -5. Big line across the bottom. That multiplying and dividing are those inverse operations. So I have to bring down the bubble. So B plus 10 equals 7, or -7 times the -5 gives me a +35. Now this time our second step, again, I want that B by itself. So I want to get rid of that minus or plus 10. And so the opposite of plus 10 is going to be to subtract 10 from both sides. Draw your big line. Plus 10 minus 10 makes 0. I get to bring down B all by itself, which is what we want. 35 minus 10 gives me 25. All right, let's go check our work. So 25 plus 10, all divided by -5. So 25 plus 10 will give me 35. 35 divided by a -5 is a -7, which again matches that equation. So we did everything correctly. All right, we have 2 more examples that are going to use something called a rational number. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So remember that rational numbers are numbers that can be written as a fraction, and sometimes we'd see them as decimals and percents. In an equation, you're usually going to see a fraction or a decimal. So when we are dividing by a fraction, remember that we're actually going to be multiplying by that flipped fraction, which is called a reciprocal. You can see an example of that reciprocal down here. So if I'm doing 10 divided by 2/3, I'm really going to be doing 10 multiplied by that reciprocal. So the opposite of reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. So this 10 divided by 2/3 and 10 times 3/2 are the same thing. Let's take a look at what this looks like in our equation. So again, we are going to keep that river or those railroad tracks. We are going to circle whatever is with that variable. So this time 3/5. I'm getting rid of that -5 first, so I did +5 to both sides. All right, bringing us down to that step that's new now with that rational number. So remember that 3/5 and x next to each other are being multiplied, so the opposite of multiplying by 3/5 is to multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 5/3, and when I plug that in, I get the x equals -15. All right, only 2 examples on this last page, so let's take a look at them together. All right, first one, let's look at number 1. Draw your river or your railroad tracks. All right, we're going to circle that 1.8 with our n, and that means that we are worried about that -4.2 first. So the opposite of -4.2 is to add 4.2 to both sides. Big line to show that first step. I get to cross those out. Those are those inverse operations. Bring down the bubble. And 8.7 plus 4.2 is going to give us a 12.9. All right, to get rid of that 1.8, right, we want, these is multiplying right now, so we're going to do the opposite, which is to divide. When I divide both sides by that 1.8, I draw that big line to show I'm done with my step. Cross out those inverse operations. N is equal to about 7.2 when we round that out together. Now, when I go and I plug that back in, we are going to plug in that 7.2 for my N. Again, if you type this in, you want to use that exact answer, because if you round it, it'll be slightly off. But when I plug that all in, I should get about my 8.7, and so my answer checks out. Last one, here we go. Draw those railroad tracks. Circle our number with our x, this time is 1/2. I am always going to that side of the variable, so I'm going to get rid of that plus 17 first. The opposite of plus 17 is a minus 17. Drawing my big line to show my steps. 25 minus 17 on the left-hand side is going to be 8. I'm going to bring down that bubble, 1/2 x. My 17 minus 17 gives me 0. Those are inverse operations you get to cross out. All right, here's the big new thing. So right now, 1/2 is being multiplied by x. So the opposite of multiplying by 1/2 is multiplying by the reciprocal, 2/1. Draw that big line in there. And so 8 times 2/1 is really just 8 times 2. So we get 16. That 1/2 and 2/1 are those inverse operations. So all I'm left with is x, which is exactly what I want. X equals 16. Let's do our last check our step. So 1/2 times that 16 we chose for x plus 17. So half of 16 is going to give us 8. Plus 17 is going to give us 25, again, which is the answer that we wanted in that equation. So we are all done. And that is how we solve our two-step equations. I hope you learned something good, and I will see you next time. Bye.